Good morning. Welcome to the Energy Generation Masterclass, the best ways to sell your power, brought to you by the Energyst and npower Business Solutions. Thank you for joining us today for this timely and essential webinar. As demand for renewable energy continues to grow, independent generators are uniquely positioned to make an impact, not only by supporting the low carbon energy transition, but also by capitalizing on a seller's market that offers significant revenue potential. In today's session, we explore how you can maximize the value of your energy generation assets while meeting the rising demand for clean energy. Whether you manage on-site generation or standalone assets, our experts are here to provide you with the practical knowledge and insight you need to succeed. We're delighted to have Michelle Stephens, Generation Services Manager, and Carl Dixon, Strategic Client Lead at npower Business Solutions, as your guides today. They will cover why independent generators hold a key advantage in today's market, step-by-step guidance for selling your energy effectively, and the latest innovations in power purchase agreements and how to leverage them. This is your opportunity to gain actionable strategies and ask questions and engage with leaders in the renewable energy space. So I do urge you to use the question panel you'll see on the right to ask questions throughout, with which we'll answer at the end during a Q&A session. So let's dive in now and explore how you can turn your energy generation into a sustainable and profitable venture. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Tim, for that introduction. And thanks everyone for being here today. Really appreciate your time this morning. I'm Michelle Stephens and I'm going to be hosting here, and I'm going to be taking you through some of the areas, and then Carl, my co-colleague, will then be going through the rest. So just to run down the agenda for this morning. So we'll be looking at the market context and exactly what's going on with the energy market, what the role is of the independent generator, and what the opportunities are for those independent generators as well. Then Carl will be looking at how you're going to be selling the power, what are power purchasing agreements, routes to market, and the benefits of selling your power. We'll then be taking any questions you may have. So if we can have the next slide, please, that'll be great. Thank you. And thank you. So first of all, we're going to be looking at the landscape in 2025 and what the opportunities are for the generators. So if we can have the next slide, thank you. So we're going to be looking at the market context and what's going on with energy. So there's been significant growth in the renewable energy market in generation, particularly in 2024, which was the first year that we saw green power overtake that of fossil fuel generation within our UK market. That's really important. So since the fall of the ROC regime and the FIT regime, and then latterly when the CFD was then brought into play, we did actually see a downturn in renewable generation. And it's really good to see that over this last couple of years, we've really seen a steady and increased growth of that renewable market coming back into play. Some of the elements that have impacted that have been some of the major policies that have encouraged more renewable generation. So we've got the Clean Power 2030 action plan. There's also been increased budgets in those contracts for difference rounds and auctions that we've seen. There's been reform of planning controls, and also we've heard the launch of the GB Energy. Importantly, what we've also seen is some massive ambitious plans by the government in terms of renewable targets for 2030. And a lot of generators and import customers are then gearing towards those renewable targets. We've seen a massive rise in that energy increase. So, for example, in offshore wind, we've seen that quadruple to 55 gigawatts of installed capacity. We've seen the tripling of solar to around 50 gigs of capacity. And then onshore wind has tripled and has gone to 35 gigs. So we've really seen a massive surge in that. There's also some baseload generation coming along too, but that's not at the notable scale that we see of those intermittent technologies. We'll now have, if we can have the next slide, we're going to segue into what businesses can do better. So in terms of businesses and what they can do better, we've published our 2024 energy tracker. And what was really interesting is it revealed that businesses are looking at both reducing costs and carbon emissions. A lot of businesses are now investing in energy efficiency, anything from internal to their buildings to external. And a lot of them are also looking at generation, so on-site generation where they can. That's ranged from on-site solar terms of rooftops, it's been small-scale developments to the side of their buildings, but it's been very difficult for some of those businesses to do that because of the space that they've had. But when it comes to switching to renewable energy, demand is really outstripping supply. Our Business Energy Tracker report looks at the impact of the energy market on businesses and the confidence, and gauges their views on various areas, including policy, data, and how they're managing their energy and carbon emissions. As we've seen there on the screen, energy efficiency, 57% of those that took part have said that they've looked at energy efficiency. Around 37% of those businesses have looked at investing on-site generation, and 33% of them are buying clean energy. So buying energy from renewable sources is often seen as low-hanging fruit, as a way to green up their brown power, and particularly to switch to greater electrification. However, currently demand for clean energy is outstripping the available supply, at least until some of the energy infrastructure changes, and that the government is proposing to come to fruition, which will really help with that. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you. So what is the role of the independent generators, and how can that help us within this marketplace achieve net zero and, importantly, energy security? So as I've mentioned before, the government's hugely ambitious plans, while organisations such as NESO have said that they are achievable. However, change is going to be needed, and it's going to be change at pace. We know that independent generators are going to play an important role in this mix. So what do we mean by an independent generator? It's those projects that aren't utility scale. So we're talking on-farm, off-farm, intermittent, such as wind, solar and hydro, baseload, such as AD, just to mention a few, and biomass. So these are things that are owned and operated as standalone assets, or they could indeed, as with the previous slide mentioned, be on-site generation. And they're projects that are a commercial or public sector organisations. At the end of 2024, we released a new report which surveyed 350 independent generators to find out their views on energy policy and what those potential barriers are for the development of more assets. Over 80% of them said that they believed independent generators will play an important role in the low carbon transmission. But why? And why is that important? Well, they need to be able to provide reliable, renewable power to homes and businesses across the UK. And importantly, they are largely unaffected by the pressures and volatility of the wholesale markets. And for that reason, they're going to play a key role in achieving our energy security and net zero transmission. Can you have the next slide, please? So in terms of that poll, what this slide is showing you is what some of the generators were saying that we actually need in order to strive to meet those goals. So on our report, we will actually provide that to you as well. So I'll just run through some of the key stats here. So over 2/3 of the respondents said that they'd seen an increase in businesses' demand to buy power from them, and over the past 2 years. And we've definitely seen that internally as well over the last few years, with more and more engagement around that. 33% have said that this is a significant increase. So what are the benefits to the business? Well, the benefits to those businesses is that it's stable pricing and it's not impacted by the wholesale market. It's guaranteed clean energy supply and it's greater security. And we've seen some of those stats in terms of the largest one out of those being the stable pricing, and that seems to be key for those renewable generators. So we're going to move over and hand over to Carl now, and he's going to talk through some of the options that generators have in terms of their route to market. So over to Carl.
Thank you, Michelle. So we're going to look at how independent generators can sell that power. So for any generator that is wanting to sell their power, the best route to market is via a power purchase agreement, also known as a PPA. So for those that are not familiar with a PPA, they are contracts between a generator and a business. That could be any type of business and is usually done via an off-taker, a supplier like ourselves. There are established ways of managing energy sales and risk in generation projects. So those PPAs will encompass all the commercial terms required to deliver a route to market for the generators. So they will include things like start and end dates, delivery schedules, pricing mechanisms, payment terms, etc. They can also include energy certificates such as renewable obligation certificates, ROCs, and renewable energy guarantee of origin, REGOs. They can cover existing generation assets or provide assurance and confidence to investors in the financing of new renewable projects. Excuse me. They're becoming increasingly popular. I think Michelle mentioned earlier, with our research, it shows that 1 in 5, that's 21% of generators are already exporting their power to a commercial customer via a fixed or flexible PPA. Those are the two typical types of PPAs that are agreed within the market, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about those now. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the screen, there's the two types of PPAs that we're talking about: a fixed price PPA. So we'll run through the main differences now. So for example, a fixed PPA tends to be more suited for small to medium-sized generators. They typically have an output of up to about 10 gigawatts, and the volume is usually quite stable and predictable. Now, the benefits with a fixed price PPA, as you can see, is an upfront price is agreed for each unit of power that is exported. And it can provide a straightforward income stream and protect the generator from the volatile energy market that we see day on day. It offers competitive prices and the reassurance that payments will be made on a regular and reliable basis. Now, these fixed price PPAs are typically between 6 and 36 months in duration. And because it's a fixed price PPA, like I say, that amount is agreed and guaranteed at the start of the contract. Now, with a flexible PPA, a little bit more flexibility there. These are and can be for both intermittent and baseload technologies. By baseload technologies, we mean technologies that are not weather dependent, so things like biomass, AD plants, things like that, and intermittent technologies are from sources such as wind and solar, which are obviously affected by and impacted by weather. So with a flex PPA, you're typically looking at sort of the size of 6 gigawatts and higher. So that can be one sort of generating asset, or it could be multiple sites in one basket, one contract. As I mentioned, flexible does give you that a little bit more control. As with fixed price PPA, you put in all your eggs into one basket, you agree on that price at the start of the contract for the duration of the contract. Flexible PPA, you can obviously choose that price point during the contract. So it allows generators to benefit from sort of real-time price changes within the market and can be supported by our award-winning optimization desk and our risk navigator portal. Next slide, please. So I guess one question independent generators ask us a lot is which is right for their asset. So it depends on a number of factors, the level of your output. So as I mentioned before, fixed PPA is good for a smaller generator or someone who's limited to the annual output of about 6 gigs or less. Flexible PPAs for anyone a little bit larger than that. The nature of your generation source as well. So we spoke about those intermittent and baseload technologies, those weather dependent technologies, and also your time constraints and your risk appetite. A fixed price PPA is just that. There's no risk during the contract. That price is guaranteed, whereas obviously with a flexible contract there's a little bit more risk. There's some decisions to be made but as I mentioned before, can be supported by our optimization desk. And finally there, your organization's objectives, whether you want that steady risk-free revenue stream or you wish to optimize profits with that flexible agreement, and your goals will ultimately determine which PPA is best for you. So what are the benefits of selling your power via a PPA to a commercial business? So our research has highlighted a few there, as you can see on the screen. Top benefits of selling your power via PPA are regular or additional revenue. So 65% of the people who responded to the survey said that they like the fact that they can secure a regular revenue for their power that is generated and exported. It also protects them from a volatile energy market. 16% said that supporting the low carbon energy transition. So with more and more businesses procuring their power from clean energy sources, independent generators have an important role to play in both meeting this demand and contributing to the UK's overall net zero strategy. So as Michelle mentioned in her earlier slides, more and more of our commercial businesses want that green power, they want that low carbon power, so they can use it in all of their reports, etc. And also investor confidence. So PPAs can cover an existing generating asset or provide assurance and confidence to investors in the financing of new renewable projects. So if your organisation is considering investing in a renewable energy asset, then getting a PPA in place could help secure that investment. Thank you. So that's my piece on PPAs and fixed and flex. I'll hand you back now to Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you. So yeah, so just to go over in terms of our offering and our generation partner offering. So we have a proven track record in this market space. We help support over 100 independent generators across the UK. Our portfolio is over 4 terawatts for our export portfolio. It's a guarantee of reliability. We're part of a larger group, part of E.ON Group. We're very technology agnostic, so irrespective of size of technology, I'll caveat that later, but in terms of size of technology, we range from anything from a 500 kilowatt AD plant or wind farm all the way up to 100 plus megawatts of installed capacity. So it does vary in terms of whether it's grid connection or transmission connected as well. So it's quite a wide approach. We offer market leading range in terms of all of our fixed flexible PPAs, index PPAs and spill PPAs. We also have a dedicated account manager. So Carl is one of our senior account managers here at npower. I run a dedicated team just dedicated to generation services. We make it really clear and easy to transact with. We have a new platform. We have our risk navigator platform for any of those generators that are looking at flexible routes to market or index routes to market. But importantly, we have our optimization desk, which fully support all of our independent generators that are looking at their flexible options and work with them. And then more importantly, that we have our energy generators platform. So that's a dedicated platform for generators only, which provide everything the customer needs from an end-to-end service. So we do have a very, very rounded offering that we can potentially bring to market. And importantly, one of the things that we touched on, but we didn't really go into any great detail, was our corporate PPA offering. So we do have a long established credibility in that marketplace as well, in both structuring and supporting both our importers, our import clients, and also our export clients in corporate PPAs as well. So a great deal of credibility in that marketplace as well. So thank you all very much for listening, and I'll hand over to Tim now, because I do believe we've got a number of questions.
Yes, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Carl. Yes, no, a number of questions are coming in, but I do encourage you to send more because we'll spend the next 20 minutes or something doing discussions, and they're here to answer any queries you have. Actually, on that, there's one that's just come in probably to Carl about did you really mean 10 gigawatts in the context of small generators, or would it be 10 megawatts? And then he's clarified, or did you mean 10 gigawatt hours?
Okay. Sorry, apologies. Yes. So in terms of a fixed versus flex PPA, typically we see an annual sort of export volume of around about 6 gigawatt hours. Those type of generators, that size of generators, typically pick a flexible PPA. Below sort of 6 gigawatt hours of exported power, they tend to go fixed. Now, that's no hard and fast rule. That's just from our experience of the years of dealing with generators. Typically, that's the sort of split. In terms of generation demand, that's around 1 megawatt of power. So yeah, that's so apologies for that. That's the correct answer from our experience.
We've got one here that came in from a reader just on registration, and it said Montgomery Farms have 2 hydros on 2 separate estates, which we currently place with various suppliers, price dependent. Interested in how your product could deal with this?
Yeah, so what we could do is we could have a look at those in as a grouping. So we could definitely have a look at hydro. Hydro is quite an interesting one, being an intermittent technology, and particularly depending on where that hydro is. Again, typically they do tend to be in Scotland, but not limited to Scotland, because there are hydros in Wales as well. And again, hydros, our experience of hydros have both been run of river and also pump storage. So the larger ones that are the pump storage tend to typically be chasing markets. So they'll be using power for the pumping stations when it's really low and pumping up and storing it at a height. And then when the market has dropped, when the import market is higher, they'll leave it there, but when the export market's above that, then they'll push it back out. So it's a kind of just moving the water around, pumping it up and down, and arbitraging really against where the market prices are. These two that you're talking about here.
There's a similar question just come in. Sorry, it says, what factors do you consider when determining the efficiency of a hydropower, and which models can you use to make hydropower plant operations efficient and financially sustainable? I thought you were actually incorporating both questions, so sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one as well, Tim, because the one thing we don't do is we don't give advice in terms of how operators operate their sites. The only thing we can do is give the guidance and the support based on the particular technology and the routes to market that somebody may decide. We may have that conversation with them when we've seen their profile, because we do analyze profiles to have a look at whether a fixed, flex, index, or indeed whether a spill PPA might be more apparent to them. And the reason I say spill PPA, because there's possibly going to be some people on here today on the webinar that don't necessarily know what I mean by spill PPA. A spill PPA is one where, and it's linked to this particular question actually, so I'll take it as it is.
Well, that's another question asking about spill PPAs already coming.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I'll cover it all in one then. So in particular with a hydro plant, because of the variability, not the pump storage, but a run of river, for example, is very, very dependent on rainfall. And one could say it always rains in the UK, so that's a guaranteed. It does to a certain degree. I'm no weather expert, but the one thing I would say is it doesn't it doesn't rain consistently, and therefore you have a consistent volume of rain that you could then calibrate, which with baseload technologies, you don't have any of that because it's fed or it's run, and it's running 24/7 pretty much. Hydros are far, far less predictable because of that, and therefore there are a lot more variables. So if a hydro customer was to come to us, we would analyse that profile. And what we might say to them, if it's really, really unpredictable, is that having a fixed price or a flex or an index may not be the best route to market for them because of that unpredictability, because it then levels in a level of what we call imbalance premia, and that imbalance premia can be quite expensive if you're out of the norm for a normal hydro plant, because we have a lot of experience in these, and therefore we would make a best judgment with that customer and put forward options. We may even actually provide those options so they can see them all and then have a look at what the impacts to them could be, and that's probably where where a spill PPA will come in. A spill PPA works really well because there are no, yes, it is the actual market price for each half hour that they are generating, but there are no imbalances associated with it. There are no penalties associated with it. So if it doesn't run, it doesn't matter. Nothing's been hedged, nothing's allocated against it. And that is why we work with a lot of schools, universities, hospitals, etc., that have combined heat and power stations on site, and they'll be using those, and also manufacturers, and they'll have some excess which they will then sell. But because their peak and flow of the power and the usage on site is not always determined or flatlined, it means you get a lot of variability. So I will say the vast majority of our CHP PPAs are system sell PPAs, because it has no risk at all. For those off takers, so that's something that they take heart in, and obviously they are getting the best value from the market at each half hourly period. Unlike the fixed price that Carl was talking about, where you know your price, a spill PPA you will not know that until after the event.
Right, and at the end of the spill PPA question specifically, she says, is this a way to maximise value from any surplus generation for behind the meter projects, e.g. solar in summer?
Yes, and it potentially is, and I'm going to really caveat this one as well. So Carl mentioned before about fixed price and sort of where our starting point is. I also mentioned around installed capacity. Given a few slides ago when we were talking about on-site generation, and people are really now looking at that and how they can, bridge those gaps from both, renewables and meeting their own criteria and goals. We do have a lot of import customers, both on the SME side and the I&C side, which is the division that Carl and I work in, the industrial and commercial division. And they are building small scale developments, and they typically will be anything under 50 kilowatts if they're rooftop and they've not got much room. And you will typically find, if they are not somebody that is there 24/7, they are never going to use the whole of that bandwidth in the summer when you have the peak of that solar generation. So the question we get asked very regularly actually is, what can I do with that? So there are different routes for smaller scale, which may be where that question came from. If somebody has adopted or is thinking of adopting, putting solar panels, using that just as an example here, onto their roof space, and it is small, and they know they're not going to use that height of during the summer, and they can't do anything else differently, like maybe charge forklift trucks or something of that, and change something that they're doing on site to make use of it, then yes, there is a route to market, which is the Smart Export Guarantee, which was a new mandate that the government put into place for the largest suppliers to provide a route to market for renewable generation for the smaller scale developer, for anything under 5 megawatts of capacity. So if somebody's got a lot of excess, then they can look to go on the Smart Export Guarantee, which E.ON offer through a different division, but E.ON can offer that.
So here's one. What are the options for small exporters, typically less than 100 megawatt per hour per annum, as many suppliers don't seem to want these smaller volumes?
Yeah, I think I'll take that one as well, because it's very linked to my response which was quite long-winded, but I apologise for that. Again, those really small scale ones, then you would be looking at Smart Export Guarantee. What I would say, I wasn't actually going to say this on here because I didn't know where the questions are going to come from, but it would be wrong of me not to point this out. So for anybody that's on this call today that is looking at small scale developments, and particularly on site, and they are typically hundreds of kilowatts, when you start thinking about, I might have some excess, therefore I think I'm going to sell it. One of the biggest things you need to ask yourself before you jump over to the Smart Export Guarantee with any supplier, so this is not E.ON unique, this is any supplier in the marketplace, is please do your homework, because the minute you get an export MPAN, because it has to be registered, so you will need an export MPAN, you will then need to make sure that your metering is half hourly or a smart meter that can take it, for those that are much smaller in the SME and more domesticated market. But for those that are not in that market, that have got a normal standard half hourly meter, you will need to make sure your meter agreement, so your MOP agreement, meter operator agreement, and your data collection agreement, which is a DC agreement, is in place for your export. Now, typically that may, and again, please, I'm just using this as a typical example here, that may cost combined around £500 per annum for the meter for those two contracts. So when you think about, just thinking about 100 kilowatts, if you're using 75% of that, and therefore you're only, and that's 100 kilowatts of solar, which is going to give you, 100 megawatts per annum. If you're only exporting 25 of those megawatts, you need to really look at what the seg tariffs are that you can get, times that by how much power you think you're going to export, and just make sure it's going to cover in excess of those costs for your metering agreement and your data collection agreement. Because what I wouldn't want anybody to do today that's looking at that is go on and do that. And I have come across people that have done this, only to find out they're paying more for the metering than they're going to get back for anything that they export, which is why some of the conversations I've had with some of our import customers here in the INC arena has been around, well, can you displace where you're using that power on site? Again, I use the example there of forklift trucks, or charging something else during those hours. Maybe look at something different you could do rather than losing it.
But yeah, maybe some sort of battery type of way, or EVs or
well,
something.
Not necessarily a battery, because they can be expensive, but I won't go down that route. But
I was only meaning EVs have batteries. It's somewhere to put them.
If you've got something that you can charge or do something else as a function, and maybe look at displacing it in a different way.
Here's an interesting one. There are residential schemes where CHP was a condition of the planning permission from 4 to 5 years ago, and they are now coming online and having to run to comply with their planning permission. The generated electricity in these cases is in excess of the landlord services demands. Is there any value in a small gas-fired generated CHP on residential schemes, 100 kilowatts to a few hundred kilowatts? And if so, what pence per kilowatt hour might be obtained?
Right, so the Smart Export Guarantee is really interesting because it does deal with micro CHPs, but I would urge whoever that question came from to just have a look on the E.ON website if you want, and put in E.ON SEG SEG Smart Export Guarantee Tariff, and it'll come up and it'll actually list down the technologies. So most of the technologies are up to 5 megawatts, but with CHP it only deals in micro CHP. So in this instance, if it's in a tenement building, for example, which typically in my experience they have been, they are going to be bigger than 50 kilowatts, I suspect. I would say that's something that the landlord needs to look at. But again, you're talking about spill PPAs, but it depends on the size of it. So it really comes back to what I was saying with what we do with some of the hospitals.
I mean, this is connected. It says, what is the lowest export volume you would contract for?
Yes, so we are talking a good few hundred megawatts per annum on a spill PPA. It wouldn't be on a flex PPA. It's typically a larger client that's using something on site. They're already a client of ours, or it's somebody, for example, it could be a TPI or a consortia group that have got a number that want to bring to us, in which case we might look at it. But I'd say that's a case-by-case basis. It wouldn't necessarily be an individual basis.
Here's one. Are npower looking at implementing the benefits of P442, which comes into action soon for their generators?
Yes.
Yeah, simple as that. It's reporting, isn't it? Reporting.
I actually thought I might get asked this question. I thought I might get asked something else. Yes, so we are actually. We're working on how we how we actually start running that internally. And I was in a meeting the other day, and it's a very, very hot topic. And unlike the embedded benefits, where we've seen for any of the generators, because I can't see who's on here today, but for any of the generators that have been around for a number of years, they will be very familiar with their old embedded benefits that they used to get. So levy exemption certificates back in the day, the triads were a really high rate, etc., and BSUOS, just to name a few, and they've all gone. And, so they've seen the demise of that. So any benefit we can bring to a generator through new legislation, new modifications, we are on the table and we are bringing that. And there are a few others on there as well. So there are other things that we're looking to bring and adapt to our generators. So that's a really, really good question.
Here's an interesting one on the smaller side again, but what sort of options and limits do you have regarding bundling, aggregating multiple smaller generators?
Again, I'll take that just because I mentioned it a minute ago. So Carl in a minute may answer another question for me, so I will then shush. But anybody that's already on here that knows me very well will know I do like to talk. So it's fine. Yeah, I think just saying repeating what I said a couple of minutes ago, actually. So again, it's a really good question, because you may have farming groups, you may have cooperative groups together that have got smaller scale wind that are doing something. So I think it's a really interesting proviso that we will have those conversations. We absolutely will, to have a look at what there is and what the benefit is and the route to market. So although I've mentioned the smaller scale potentially not in our remit and it would be SEG, the one thing I would absolutely say is the metering still comes in irrespective. So those are some of the things I would probably, my team would have those conversations with them. So if anybody's got anything and they want us to reach out, then please let us know. We'll reach out to you independently.
As a follow-up to the spill PPA, they said, great, thanks for answering that. Is there a risk that the export would attract negative prices at times of peak generation?
Yeah, in short, their answer is yes. So that as a lot of independent generators may already know, the market can go negative at times if there's obviously too much export generation versus demand. Yeah, like I said, short answer is yes, it can attract those negative prices.
Okay.
But sorry, Tim, just on the opposite of that, the opposite to that is those peak prices. Those positive prices can be very high at times as well.
So you could get massive price at certain points, and then
100%. I mean, it typically does average itself out over a period of time, but yeah.
And typically, just to add on to that, it would only affect you if you were generating during that half-hourly period.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting one, slightly different. Hopefully, this isn't an amateur question. As a solar installer, should we be contacted by farmers, etc., or large-scale sites such as car park rooftops? What methods could we use to put the customer or potential customer in contact with the correct departments at npower? Would we remain oversight to know when an install is ready to go ahead? What sort of timescales do we look at to get these wheels in motion? A much more practical.
Yeah, I think I mean the earlier the better that we can get involved in those conversations. Obviously build that relationship and also look at what are the right options for the generator and potentially the end customer if it's a corporate PPA. So we can look at obviously supply and demand. So who is looking for PPA to buy some low carbon power from an independent generator from our input side of view. We can then start discussing what is the right product, the price point, and things like that. And then we can get involved in the new connection process as well, helping that generator with the installation of the meter and track any installation and registrations along the way as well. So I would encourage those conversations to begin quite early on.
There's another one here, Carl, that says Carl referred to 1 megawatts for small to medium fixed PPA. What options are available for sub 1 megawatt PV generation?
So I think Michelle's covered
I think
covered that a little bit in terms of the potential spill PPAs. So if it is a very small intermittent volume, then you're probably looking at spill, or you are looking at seg. If it's base loaded, it's quite flat, it's quite predictable, then don't rule out any of the products just because it's less than 1 megawatt. We can still look at a fixed PPA. We can still look at potentially a flex PPA. I think the 1 megawatt was just the typical split we see. We typically see people that have 1 megawatt or more going on to a flex PPA to have that more flexibility. People with sort of less than that typically go fixed, but it's no hard and fast rule.
probably a quick one here, but do you know whether the smart export guarantee max up to 5 megawatts, is that per project or per portfolio?
It's per project, so it's per sort of individual contracting entity name. And again, I would just urge anybody, and that's across the board, that's across the UK. It's not unique to E.ON, and I would just encourage people to have a look. If anybody's got anything that's over sort of a megawatt or just under a megawatt, then definitely we would be the people to talk to, rather than the seg tariff, because the rates would be potentially higher, to look at different options with us.
Do you expect generators to transfer regos to you with their power?
We don't expect, no. We are open to conversations in terms of providing a route to market for the regos to us, or if it is via a CPPA, a corporate PPA, then the commercial customer may want to again include those in the negotiations and the discussions around taking those regos from that generator. So we don't expect it. It's all part of those conversations as to if the price point is right or not.
The one thing I would just caveat on that as well is that if the power comes to us without the REGO, for all intents and purposes, it is still brown power. The renewable certificate actually proves that it's green power. So without the renewable generation certificate, it is, to want of a better word, still green, still brown power.
Yeah, and as for the research that we've spoken about in the slides previously, end business customers, one of the big reasons why they want to engage in a power purchase agreement with a generator is because of that low carbon power.
We often hear about 15 to 20 year PPAs have fixed rates agreed, but actually the rate is often only fixed in shorter windows, e.g. 3 to 5 years. What contractual means does either party have to amend the rate during the term of the PPA?
So in terms of a fixed PPA, that rate is fixed for the duration of the contract.
That would be for 15 years or something.
Yeah, so as we mentioned before, typically 6 to 36 months is a typical fixed PPA in line with the liquid curve. Anything longer than that, we're putting contracts in place with those end import customers, those businesses that have potentially large import requirements. So we can fix a price for the power generated for a longer term. Obviously, there will be T's and C's involved and lengthy conversations, but typically that price is fixed for that duration. The T's and C's will just be there to protect all parties in times of change for whatever that may be. But yeah, if a fixed price is agreed for a duration of time, it is fixed for that period.
When we've talked about fixed and flexible PPAs and obviously spill PPA, but are there any other types of PPA that people should be aware of as generating power?
I think there are index-linked PPAs. So we spoke about SSP, which is the spill PPA. We've talked about fixed and flex. Within that flexible agreement, you can link your power price to an index such as N2EX, which is obviously a day-ahead auction day-ahead price. There are other indices available. Caveat that one. But yeah, typically, if a customer does link to an index, an index, it tends to be N2EX.
Here's one. Why would a generator enter a CPPA arranged by npower rather than selling direct to npower?
I'll take that. So just a caveat. So why would they enter into a corporate PPA rather than entering into a PPA with us?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, there's a number of reasons actually, but either or, they will still end up with a supplier involved in that, because the power's got to leave them and go through the network and reach reach a destination. So regardless, if I've dealt with many that have been through us, and then other ones where a corporate has found a generator and then brought them to the table. So I've done it multitude of ways. So yes, I mean, first and foremost, if it's that route, then they may matchmake together and go out and tender for that and find a generator. But ultimately, that generator will still have to, depending on how the PPA is structured. So I will actually say that if it's structured so that we'll call it solar farm number one, still needs to go to an off-taker, then they will still need to go and take an off-taker, whether it's npower or another, they will still need to go there, because there still needs to be a transactional agreement. If it's not, so I've done them that way, and I've also done them where the corporate has also taken the PPA in their name, and then whoever their importer is, for example, us, they've then placed the PPA with us, so that generator is out of the relationship. So it depends on how the triangle works and who's involved in that, but there is a triangle nonetheless.
Right.
I think just to add to that, Tim, and the reason why a supplier off-taker needs to be involved is because they will manage the balancing risk.
Yeah.
A generator might generate 10 kilowatt hours in an half an hour period. The importer won't take 10 kilowatt hours, they might only take 9. So there is that imbalance risk, and that is managed by the supplier, the off-taker.
Yeah.
Do npower offer financial PPAs, REGOs included, if the generator already has a physical off-taker on a long-term basis?
Well, they would already have an off-taker in the background, which they've got a long-term. I'm going to assume here that they've got a long-term agreement, say 15 years. It would really depend. It wouldn't necessarily be an npower question, as in my team's question. It would be really to do with the corporate and whether the corporate wants that power and what price they're prepared to take that sleeved volume. I won't go into too much detail here, but it will depend on what that financial, because effectively it's a financial swap. It's not a physical swap, it's a financial swap. And that would be between the undertaking of us and our collateral agreement that we've got with our import client, and a financial swap with another supplier in the background. So it'll just be more of a financial swap in the market, as opposed to, it's quite a technical question, so a good question, but it's more of a financial swap in the market than it is a physical swap. So it happens. It's rare, really, I would say, in terms of financial. A lot of corporates now don't do those kind of events. They really want that additionality. They want the link with the generator. So whether that's the link and the generator is with us with the PPA, or whether they are undertaking the PPA in their name and they have a separate agreement, remember the triangle, with the generator, they want that link. It's no longer they just want to pay for REGOs to green up their brown power. They're looking for these absolute links now.
What is the upper limit for generation on a fixed rate PPA, and also the maximum term?
I think Carl mentioned it before, at about 36 months, because you're talking about the liquid market and locking in against a liquid market.
In terms of direct with us, obviously via a business customer, there isn't an upper limit. I mean, we've seen contracts 15, 20 years with a pricing mechanism to fix that price out that long with a business. So and again, with flexible PPAs, similar timescales.
And volume on a fixed price, because I think that might be where that question was leading, but it may not have. We mentioned there typically anything sort of like below 10 gigs, but we have had much larger customers wanting that absolute, I just want to lock in for 18 months or 12 months, whatever it may be, and they're 20 something and above gigs. So again, we will still do that. It's just not typical for that type of customer. Ordinarily, they'd be more of a flex route. So, but we do it.
On the small PV spill, what about an aggregation nationally of a large number of sites from a large portfolio of sites, i.e. small amounts from each? What's the minimum aggregated volume that would make a spill worthwhile?
I don't necessarily think it's the minimum. I think it really is going to come down to thinking about when we very first started the Q&A session. It would really be very dynamic to the size of the asset that's being installed, the metering, the MOP and the DC costs that will then drive that conversation. I have been asked a good few times last year about nationals and potentially doing something on a very small scale, but albeit it's very broad. And the problem you've got with that, it's the number of sites, but importantly, it's that pivotal bit in terms of how much they're going to bring and what's the cost to them. So I'd say we'd have that conversation, but we'd have to be very aligned to say, well, those 20, 30 customers are going to be paying a privilege of their MOP and their DC costs to just export, and actually it's going to cost them, they're going to retain less than what it's actually physically going to cost, so it's counterproductive. So I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks is that actually in terms of scale and small scale, and trying to aggregate them together. It's the pivotal bit about the metering, if I'm being really honest, that kind of puts a bit of a spanner in the works. And if it's domestic, then that would also, we don't deal on the domestic market, so we don't deal with the domestic side of the market. That would always go via a SEG.
There's obviously a lot of interest in PPAs. We always get that with articles we write and then like the questions we've had today. Is it, a lot of people do solar and battery, they're advertising almost as a product. Is that almost in competition with exporting as via a PPA? You could do one or the other. There are two options if you say you have a PV array that's large enough.
No, not really. We see independent generators with batteries installed that will obviously charge the battery and discharge that power during other times of the day when they can use that power. Or it may be that they discharge that battery into the market at times of high peak prices to sort of get a benefit from that. So I guess the beauty of having PV and battery installation or any generation with a battery is it gives you that flexibility, it gives you the options, it works nicely with our flexible PPAs. There are a lot of other opportunities and benefits, just to mention a few there. But it does give you a greater flexibility in the option to achieve prices in the market that you might not have been able to achieve, any other time, because you're in charge of that battery. You're in charge of when you charge it, when you displace that power.
And we do have a lot of experience on that. And one of our case studies, which we can provide as well, is a co-located battery and solar. But it is at scale, so that's the one thing I would say. It is at scale, and it is actually in a public sector authority as well, which might be very surprising to hear. But nonetheless, it's a really, really good case study. That's not the only one that we have, but that, as a case study, that'd be really interesting if people are interested in that.
We will shortly draw to a close. I've got a couple more questions that have come in, but I just make sure that on your panel you should see there's an attachment of a handout of Clean Power 2030. It's npower's looking at the larger independent generator market, and it's surveyed 350 of the UK's independent energy generators and what they'd like to see about future policy, views on net zero funding and PPAs. And so if you, just to make you aware that is available on the right if you haven't spotted it. This one, where is it? Sorry, I've gone off the question now. Do you currently work with consultants who have access to large-scale generators to match them on a CPPA basis with npower's corporate import clients?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. It's what we call matchmaking, and I liken myself, apart from the colour of my hair, to Cilla Black, in terms of blind date and putting those matchmaking there together. And it is very much, isn't it? It is about matchmaking, because you will have a generator. You're probably all laughing at me now, but we'll add some humour to it. It is very much about matchmaking, because you will have on the one side, you will have a generator that's, let's just use for example a 20 megawatt solar park that they're about to build or they've just built, and they are looking, so they're okay and they've been able to build it, but ideally they're looking for a corporate PPA, so they're wanting an importer to take that for 5, 10, 15 years. Typically it's 10 to 15 years in terms of a pricing mechanism. So we will then look at both, our import base is over 20 terawatts of power per annum. So we have a very healthy I&C, and that's just our industrial and commercial division portfolio of import clients. Some of those already do corporate PPAs, so they're very well versed in that. So they would be a brilliant introduction to those generators, because they've already done it. Seasoned professionals, I would say, so they're much easier to transact with. But we would do that matchmaking. We would bring the two together, because we have a lot of them that we've got in a bit of a bank that are saying, I'm looking for 50 or 60 gig out of 2026, 2027. So it's almost like trying to match them together to see, is there anything anybody can do in the yield in the meantime? And what's really important as well is it is about price, but it's not always about price. It's about the type of project, the term that they're looking for in terms of the generator or the funder that is looking for, the duration of the fixed price, and who that import customer is as well is really, really important to them as well, that we match that and they're very much aligned. So we've got an awful lot of experience in doing that.
And it's the security, as Michelle said,
Yeah.
It's not always about price. It's the security of that price for both a generator and an importer, because they're moving away from that market volatility. They're not trying to catch that high price or low price. If you're an importer, you've got that price guarantee for that period of time, and any market movements has been taken out of that.
And importantly, they're all gearing towards their net zero goals, and they've all fundamentally, so some of the public sector are working to 2025, 26, 27, etc. Some that are not public sector but other industries that we work with are gearing towards a 2030. Some of them are aligning to, they're not in the RE100, but they're following the guidance and the principles of an RE100. You touched on it earlier about the CHPs within buildings and the regulations around that. So some of those are aligning to RE100, for example, and the carbon audits. So everyone's kind of aligning to different things, but ultimately their end goal is still the same. They're all heading towards a net zero position. One of the earlier slides clearly called out that although we've got lots of generation on at the moment, and there is a tremendous amount still coming on and in planning, it's going to take us a while to get there. And we mentioned earlier that supply is outstripping demand. It's just not coming on quick enough. And that's why we're trying to push, when we're at the table and talking to government, trying to push these things around, connections, which tend to be some of the biggest issues, and planning. To try and green up, that revolution of the green energy. It's been here for a long time, but there's just such an exponential growth in terms of who's wanting it and how we get that developed.
So I think we're actually drawing to a close time-wise. So thank you both much, Michelle and Carl, for that extended question session, and thank you everyone for asking questions. It was a really interesting session. Do remember you can download the report. There'll be copies of the slides and the recording made available on the Energyst.com. And so thank you all for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.